Hello and welcome to this demo of multi-cloud disaster recovery with Rancher Kubernetes Engine and Portworx. What we'll be showing today is two separate Rancher clusters in two different regions. One will be deployed as our active site. This Rancher cluster will have a Portworx cluster deployed to it to serve stateful applications. We will also have a DR site in a totally separate region, and Portworx will also be installed here to act as our disaster recovery. We will connect those via a cluster pair so that Kubernetes application objects and data can be synced from our active site to our DR site. And in case of a failure, we can promote the DR site to our active site so that the applications can be recovered. Here we have both our primary and DR site. Primary is on the left and our DR site's on the right. Both are 6-node clusters. The primary site is deployed in east and the DR site is in the west. If we see here that Portworx is deployed through the Rancher catalog as Portworx primary. And on our DR site, Portworx is also deployed through the Rancher catalog as Portworx failover. We can interact with the Portworx system and pods through Rancher itself. So here we can select a Portworx pod and drop into a shell. Here we have pxctl, pixie-cuddle access to our cluster. You can get the status of Portworx cluster. Here we can see it's healthy, has about 600 gigabytes of active space. And we have one volume, which is part of our application, which we'll talk about in a minute. That's 10 gigabytes and has an HA level of 2. If we drop into our default project in both clusters, you can see our primary has our application running in the demo namespace, and the DR site doesn't have anything yet. This is expected because we haven't created any migrations or synced the clusters yet. The Postgres database holds the data from the web application that's running at 30123 port. Here we have Route 53 serving the application. We can see currently the primary cluster is healthy and the failover cluster is unhealthy. So here we can interact with the application at the same port I mentioned before. We can interact by clicking the screen, which adds a database record for every Kubernetes logo that appears on the screen and keeps account of those as well. Now that we have some data that's in Postgres that we've interacted with the application, we now have to set up our clusters so that the DR site actually starts getting synced and starts getting backups of our application. So at the primary site, what you'll want to do is connect to the DR site via a cluster pair. Now I've already set this up, so you can see I've named it failover cluster, and the storage and scheduler status are both ready. This connects our primary cluster to our DR site and allows us to set up migrations so that the data and Kubernetes objects can get migrated. What we'll want to do is use a policy which allows us to migrate snapshots to our DR site based on a schedule. Here I've said to use a schedule that migrates things every 1 minute, also at a daily time, weekly time, and monthly time. We can connect this schedule to a migration schedule, which targets the demo namespace and the failover cluster pair, and includes the resources, but doesn't start the applications. We want to be able to tell the DR site when to start based on a failure. So now we can go ahead and create that migration schedule, which will kick off the initial migrations and then keep migrating based on the policy we used. If we watch the current migrations, we should see the initial migration that will migrate the volumes and application state. Here we can see that it's at the stage of volumes, which it's migrating the Postgres volume, and it's in progress. We can watch the demo namespace on the DR site, which currently doesn't have anything, and that's on purpose. Until the application state's migrated for the first time, it won't show up. So as you can see, we can go into the projects and namespace in both clusters and see that the demo namespace only exists in the primary site currently until that initial migration happens. So now it's moving on to the applications, which is migrating all the Kubernetes objects, including the namespace. Once that finishes, we can see that the Kubernetes objects are populated, both the web application and the Portworx database in the demo namespace. Now, if we go back to the UI, we can see that the demo namespace now exists in the DR site. So what we'll want to do is make sure this is part of the default project so we can have a similar view on our primary and DR site. So dropping into both, we can see the application now exists in both clusters. However, the DR site doesn't yet have any replicas, and primary is running all the replicas. This is great because as backups are synced with our DR site, we can recover as needed. DR will continue to back up based on our interval, but note that if we add data like I'm doing now, and then our cluster fails, we'll only be able to recover based on our most recent backup. So we're going to go ahead and fail the cluster. I have a little script here that will go ahead and do that for me so we can simulate this exact thing. So now that we've failed the cluster, you can see the primary is spinning down to 0 replicas and the DR site spinning up the same amount of replicas that we had in the primary. You can see that the pods are all getting removed, simulating the failure. And on the DR site, we can now see the running pods, and the Postgres database is using a snapshot of the most recent backup that it has. So if we go back to interacting with our application, we can see that Route 53 now reports that the primary cluster is unhealthy because it has failed or we've either simulated that failure. And the failover cluster will kick in a second and become healthy. There we go. And now it's serving traffic. So if we go back to interact with our application, it'll have the data of the most recent backup. So note that those few clicks will probably be gone. Here we can see that we've recovered to our most recent backup, which was taken in between when I clicked, so a minute before that. Great, we've successfully recovered our application. Portworx is available in the Rancher catalog. We are a partner with Rancher. You can visit portworx.com or tweet us at Portworx. Thanks for watching, and until next time, cheers.